had the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Jerome Lubbe, and we talked about a variety of different topics from his origin story, from trauma to becoming less broken, more whole, to how this impacts teams and communities and our overall professional networks. I'm excited for you to dig in and hear more about this. So let's go. Hello and welcome to Open Door. Today's guest has spent his life studying the brain, human behavior, and what it actually means to show up as a whole person at work. Dr. Jerome Lubbe is a clinician, advisor, and author who works with complex neurological cases, business leaders, and teams. But here's what sets him apart. Jerome isn't just a doctor, he's also a patient. And that experience has shaped everything about how he sees people. His work just isn't about fixing anyone, it's about helping them to understand themselves. Jerome, thank you for being here and welcome to Open Door, sir.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I appreciate it, brother.
100%, man. Well, I just love your story. So I'd love to dig in to your personal story because I think it explains a lot about who you are and your approach to the work that you do today. So could
Yeah.
you just give us a little bit of behind the scenes of Dr. Jerome
Yeah.
Lubbe?
Absolutely. I always tell people it's especially in today's day and age, it's either true or it's like a an offshoot, low budget Jason Bourne thing that you ran through ChatGPT. Uh, but the reality is, I'm originally born in South Africa, immigrated on asylum status as a refugee from Congo in the early '90s. $100, two suitcases, a bipolar grandmother, and a parrot. We started off in Northeast Tennessee, and the background is just wild. My mom was British born, but Zimbabwean raised. My dad's side of the family was Rhodesian Zimbabwean for centuries. And we came into the States with very humble beginnings, to say the least. Fast forward, I ended up getting an undergrad in digital animation and film and used to do music full time with my brothers. My dad passed when I was a freshman in high school. And as a senior in high school, I started experiencing some pretty intense migraines. Fast forward to 26, and I've already been married 5 years, raising my wife's younger brother, who moved in with us shortly after I got married at 21 and my wife was 19. And through the entire journey, I'm navigating about 80 to 100 full blown migraines per calendar year,
Wow.
secondary to 7 different head injuries. Including being hit by 2 different drunk drivers at different years, head on by a sober driver. Just a lot of crazy things happened. So by the time I hit 26, I was going, gosh, I've had almost close to 800 migraines at this point in the last 9 years. And I have gone everywhere to get support from everyone. And my wife's younger brother is moving into college. We're moving into empty nesters at at 24 and 26. What do we do? And I ended up deciding at that time, because the music career was coming to an end. I was a harmony vocalist, and no one was hiring a harmony vocalist for a full time position like my twin brother and my older brother got full time gigs as musicians. And I decided, I think I'm going to go back to school and see if I can figure out this thing called healthcare, because I was a complex case that I could get some really good insights from traditional healthcare as to kind of what it was called. And I knew that there were a lot of people in the alternative spaces that wanted to help me be well, but they had no idea how to do complex cases. So I took this lifetime of really wild, complex experiences and said, what would it look like to specialize in complex cases, but from a wellness perspective, and kind of merge those two fields? And it's turned into the clinic that I have now, that I've had for, as wild as it sounds, close to 12 years at this point. So it's been quite a ride.
I love that. I love that. And one of the things that I think really stood out was, the element of how did being a patient really shape the doctor that you've become, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously there was this element of within the system you were at, it wasn't working for you, right? And you were trying
No.
to solve this problem for yourself. So I'd love for you to
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that I tell people about the purgatory spaces, where if anybody's ever been a professional patient, or or they've become a content expert in a thing that they really never asked for, I could go into a room with a clinician and be as educated as them on the topic, because I'd spent 15 years inside of it.
Mm,
And I always tell folks, the reason I never meant to be a doctor. My undergrad's in film. I was doing music full time. But the only reason I became a doctor was I couldn't find a good one, or I couldn't find one that knew how to navigate kind of what I was going through when drugs and surgery weren't on the table, or the traditional kind of approach to, pun intended, or the irony in this, the traditional approach to alternative care was, hey, all the things that I offered you aren't making a difference. So why don't we just keep referring you? And you end up in this carousel of referrals and bouncing all over the place. And you become so aware of the healthcare system in the US and going, God, there's got to be. And it's kind of like the person who loves food and wants to open a restaurant so that they can make the food they want to eat.
Hmm.
I did that. And I also love food, especially as an immigrant kid. I distinctly remember my first meal that cost more than $30 and going, there's a reason that you pay for good food, and realized really quickly that you can do a concierge clinic. You can do a clinic with a Michelin star mindset that takes care of complex cases. So I really just ended up going, man, the worst thing that could happen is if anybody felt that I sounded or acted or looked like a doctor, because that's not my goal. But I wanted to create a space where people could come in and go, God, I don't think I've ever been heard properly. I don't think anybody's ever connected the dots. And you're the first doctor that told me two things. One, I'm allowed to have more than one problem because everybody you go to wants to kind of work on their area of expertise. Nobody's going to be as crazy as me and go out and get board certified or board eligible in 9 different degree areas so that you can just go, I don't have to refer you out. I think I can help with that. But even more than anything, just saying, why don't we create a space where it doesn't feel like you're at the doctor? You're allowed to have more than one problem, but also, in case no one's ever told you, I work for you. Like the reason that I'm here is because you've hired me to be your clinical support. So at the end of the day, you're my boss. Let's see what we can figure out. And just taking that experience of 2.5 decades of clinical encounters and going, and when I started at school at this point, it had been a decade, but now it's 25 years going, what could I do differently in every encounter I've had with healthcare that made it to where no one really enjoys going to their doctor because their doctor doesn't understand what it's like to be a patient. And me being a patient doctor is both somebody who understands what it's like to be a patient, but also you need your doctor to be a patient person. So just trying to thread all those things in.
No, I love that. I have two follow-up questions. One would be, I'm so curious, what was the meal that you had as you explained
Yeah.
the marrying with the Michelin star experience? What was the meal?
It was distinctly a steak at a restaurant outside of a mall in Scottsdale, Arizona, when I was
That's
when I was
awesome.
19. Because you got to understand, like when my dad had passed at 14. I was a freshman, and we worked in restaurants. Like we worked illegally for my dad for 6 years in a foundry. And if anybody understands what blacksmithing and foundry work is, you don't really have 10-year-olds working there. But he couldn't afford employees, and he traded us meals at dinner for work, sometimes 2 meals a day. It was great. But when he died, we all got jobs in restaurants, and I worked at a Steak and Shake or at Johnny Rockets, singing
Got it.
songs, wishing, so it's like all these spaces. But we had really cheap food all the way through high school, which is why I probably ended up 315 pounds. But when I had the steak in college, a buddy of mine who I ended up living with was like, no, 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 you got to understand, this is how you order the steak, and these are the sides that you get. And it was the moment that I was like, this is why Luke felt the aura coming off of Yoda, because he understood all the ways. And this guy walked me through how to order a steak and how to get the sides. And it was life changing. It was, the entire experience was absolutely, in the clinical world, we call it limbic, but
Mm.
it was just life giving. It was amazing.
That's really cool. I love the distinctions that you're drawing and the similarities between the two.
Yeah.
Going through and having these migraines and going into situations where you feel you're explaining your own personal experience, right? And someone's trying to discover that, and you going through just challenges in that system. When did you arrive to the fact that this challenge could actually become your life's work? Was there an aha moment when that happened?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing in life where you get kind of a constellation of things that happen, a convergence, a synergy of sorts. I always joke with folks that I never got called in anything. I think I got tied to the back of something and drug into it. I didn't intend to show up here. But it was one of those things where I tend to be a very forecast driven person. I think years ahead, not minutes ahead. And what ended up happening was there were so many doors that were closed. Like I had the digital animation degree and I was working on the portfolio. And then 6 months into being married as a 21-year-old to a 19-year-old wife, we got a 12-year-old. And it was like,
Mm.
well, digital animation doesn't keep food on the table. So I had to shift away from that. And 7 years later, I had no skill in it anymore. So that was gone. And then we were doing music full time, and the music stopped overnight because the person who was funding our our efforts in doing all of the work. His wife's cancer came out of remission. Her health insurance company dropped her, and we had to stop our tour overnight when everything was going really, really well. I won't belabor the story, but I got into this place where I'm going, all of the things that I've really put my time and energy into are no longer available to me in the same way. I've put years and a degree into animation, years and a lifestyle into doing music with my brothers.
Hmm.
What is it ultimately that if I had to spend the next 10 years or the next 20 years doing that I could control, that wouldn't be taken away from me? Or I could take everything that I've learned up to this point and go, based on my current understanding, what would I do differently? Based on my current understanding, how would I show up differently? And I went, at the end of the day, man, I'm at a point where what I am craving is for someone to take care of me in the ways that I haven't been able to. And that's kind of where you switch into that. You give what you need and you teach what you need to learn kind of thing. And I
Sure.
went, well, what I really want to learn is how to take care of myself better and then maybe turn that into a profession. And all of that kind of consolidated into this idea of going, what if I could take care of really complex cases through an
Hmm.
alternative mindset? And let me see if I can find a place. And it ended up that fortunately, the place that I wanted to go after lots of research was a 45-minute drive away. So I decided to commute and do the place that was near my home.
I love that. I
Yeah.
as you talk about your background and your story and trauma and relocating to the United States, I think one of the things that you said that really struck me, especially being in this patient doctor kind of relationship and you going from patient to doctor and having the empathy to give back, was you spoke a lot about this thing of feeling safe, right? And this element of the decisions that we make is we're either running towards pleasure or away from pain, right?
Mhm.
So I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about what that means when you create a safe place for people, and
Yep.
how that impacts teams specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually there's some really good research on this from a Harvard professor called Amy Edmondson. It's called Psychological Safety, specifically in team settings. Her work is really, really good. But the way that the brain is set up and the way that human beings are set up in any container, but especially in containers like work or clinical settings where there's a lot riding on it, is we don't always remember that the brain can't tell the difference between perception and reality.
Hmm.
So it's going to respond the exact same way to a gun being pulled on you as you running late for a flight. So the phrase that we use is bears and deadlines, that your brain can't tell the difference between a bear and a deadline. If you're running late for a flight or you're running late for a meeting, or you're going, hey, the boss has called me and asked me for a one on one, and I'm going, am I getting called to the principal's office or am I getting a raise or am I getting fired? The reality is your brain is always 100% of the time starting with a strategy about survival and about safety. So when we get into any scenario and we know that the instinctive response, the very first thing that's happening unconsciously is to ask, is this going to make me more safe or less safe and to what degree? It helps us to start to really recognize, why do I show up so differently when I'm having a conversation with one colleague versus one boss versus one client,
Hmm.
and going, there's a particular space that I can feel I put 10 minutes of work into, but it feels like a day worth of work. That's probably because there's a degree of compromise in the safety that you're experiencing
Sure.
or the amount of enjoyment that you have. So being able to know that there is always a measure of safety that's being evaluated in the brain about that pleasure and pain kind of conversation really changes the way that we show up.
So I've had instances personally, because it's really important to me and even for our company, that I'm growing and have a growth mindset as a leader, right?
Yeah.
And team dynamics, leadership, even constituents of the organization. I think we all know what it means to be triggered. But I'd love
Yeah.
for you to unpack a little bit of what's happening and when we're operating out of that place of feeling unsafe, right? Where our brains can't tell the
Yeah.
difference between a deadline or if a bear is chasing us, right?
Yeah.
Help me understand what is happening when our kind of prefrontal cortex goes offline, if you will.
Yeah. Well, the reality is everybody's got the Hulk and Bruce Banner in them, right? I don't know exactly what the female or the gender fluid name for Bruce would be, but we've all got a controlled and an uncontrolled version of us. There's lots of good examples in the world of how your brain wars against your body and vice versa, spirit wars against the body, kind of thing.
Sure.
But man, the reality is the Hulk and Bruce Banner are the same person. They just change in context. And it isn't just that we hulk out by getting angry, it's that we hulk out based on fear, based on what triggers us. So sometimes it can be that fear turns into panic, or anger turns into rage, or comedy turns into hysteria.
Mm,
Basically, the Hulk is just an unregulated emotion. And
mm,
the easiest way to know what's happening in the brain is that when fear goes up, cognition goes down. It is normal. It's normal for us to move into a more reactive space instead of a responsive space if
mm.
the fear goes up, if the threat goes up, because you don't have time. If you're running from a bear in the woods, you're not stopping and going, let's have a board meeting. Jim asked for a board meeting. Jim got eaten, right? You're not in a space where you're going, let's sit down and have lunch. Let's take a break. Let's have a nap. Let's connect with our community. If the
It's
fear goes up,
protect, climb a
it's
tree, run
protect, it's
away.
stay
Yeah.
safe.
Mm,
Yeah, and the two easy ways to know, everything's on a spectrum, so there's nothing in life or in the brain that is binary. It's never either or. You have
sure,
a North Pole, a South Pole, and an equator. Everything in between is necessary, right? But the
sure,
two main things that you can always look at when you're trying to process, okay, what's my relationship with safety? Is somebody either interfered with what you are pursuing, or
sure.
they introduced what you are avoiding. And if you can
Mm.
figure out what those two things are, they either introduced what you're avoiding or they interfered with what you're pursuing, you can pretty quickly gauge why you're getting more reactive.
That makes sense. And
Yeah.
when it's I have an 11-year-old son, and he has ADHD. And so a lot of is teaching him how to come back down, right? Kind of calm us
Yeah.
back down. And so I've learned a lot even by watching him of I see parts of myself in him too. So this
Yeah.
element of like when you're really triggered and activated, it's really easy to look on it after the fact and say calm down. But when you're triggered and activated in
Yeah.
that stress state, it's really, really difficult.
Totally.
So why does stress and pressure affect us in that way to where we get supercharged? And are there any like small tips that you can just offer to help bring us back down to earth
Yeah.
so we're not
Yeah.
orbiting?
Totally. And I call it a paradox of safety. So the funny thing is you will in one hand use the thing that you are unaware of
Sure,
at high levels of intensity, but not be aware of it. Case in point, whether you're a growth mindset CEO or you're an 11-year-old with ADHD, both of those are gas pedal experiences. So things move faster. Like to be a first mover and a growth oriented person in business, or to have ADHD, you got to hit the
sure.
gas pedal. You're not slowing down. And
Mm,
the reality is, the more reactive we get, the more we have a physical experience. It moves into a body based encounter, but the less aware we are of our body. So we don't become embodied. We don't actually recognize that we're in a body, but our body is driving the conversation. So it's kind of like going
sure,
on an autopilot. And
sure.
if you're on autopilot, it makes sense. It's normal. But the most effective thing, even in cases like we're having a conversation now, one of the things that's a really easy trick is if you notice somebody wants to move faster, or you notice that they've got a higher degree of intensity, I can change my tone, and I
Hmm.
can change my speed, and I can change my cadence, and I will get your attention differently, and it will become a different kind of challenge. And if I start to accelerate and start to tell you that the best thing you can do is check into your body and make sure that you're fully present with somebody, it
Yeah.
changes the way that you show up if you actually breathe and shift your tone, shift your pace, shift your cadence. And that's a great tactic, not only for employees, but also definitely for family members, that if they need you to speed up, you can try and speak faster. Or if you're asking them to slow down, you actually slow down your speech and check in.
Yeah, I love that. And, we've done a lot of breath work, even things for myself to learn. But one thing I've noticed with him as well is touch, right?
For
Because I
sure.
can yell his name multiple times, right? And by
Yeah.
the time I yell his name a fifth time, now I'm activated.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
so just kind of but I think a lot of this patient doctor piece is you're giving people tools to learn more about themselves, right? And
100%.
so as you're giving me a more understanding about myself and dynamics of how we show up within environments and communities, I think the thing that I think about most often as a leader is I say this all the time, especially with my recruiter, my HR team, or just the team in general, is let's not refer to ourselves as a family, right?
Yeah.
Because that assumes that everyone had the same family environment. That also assumes that everyone had a
Yeah.
positive experience. And when we use that, it could
100%.
tap into traumas and things in our past that aren't necessarily
Yeah.
true, right? So, as I am a leader running this organization and training up other leaders, I see how conflict can show up inside of teams and
Yeah.
those situations that, how to deal with staff and colleagues who may not be on the same page as you. And we never
Yeah.
really think about what's going on in their inner landscape and what's getting them triggered, right? And you
Yeah.
talk a lot about this idea of when someone is triggered, they're often responding from a much younger version of themselves, right? And of
Right.
course, we consider their childhood, and we don't consider someone's childhood when we're in the office, right? We're considering the
Yeah.
deadline, right? The bear,
Right.
right? We
Yeah.
don't consider even our own upbringing and when we're
Mhm.
triggered and how we react in that moment, right? And
Correct.
that blew my mind, knowing that I might be responding out of a place where Chris is 7, right?
Yeah.
So, what is actually happening in those moments when we talk about bringing these inner dynamics and pieces? Now we're talking about bringing it into a community-based setting in this specific context, teams, professionalism, creative teams, marketing teams,
Yeah.
all of that conflict is inevitable, but help me to understand how that is being brought into a team and how we can change the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's different aspects in here in relationship to brain and body integration, maturity, relationships with the pain you're avoiding, the pleasure that you're pursuing. But realistically, the easiest thing to look at it, which it's the same throughout our entire life. It just changes in terms of access and strategies and tools based on the age that we're currently working through.
Sure.
But 100% of what you're talking about is a conversation around self gratification. And self gratification, a lot of people think is just feeling good. But
Mm,
the reality is, as somebody who is actually having a really good year, this year and last year was a good year, but the previous 23 were pretty difficult. If somebody said, hey, you're still going to have 30 migraines a year, but you're used to having 100, that doesn't mean that I'm having a great year. It means I'm having a year that's less bad. So self
mm,
gratification is not only more pleasure, it's less pain. That's more gratifying to have a significant amount of pain. You're in the middle of a situation with a business and you're like, we are hemorrhaging money. And it's not like all of a sudden we just made $1 million client. It's that we realized where we're losing money and we plugged the hole. So we didn't make more money, but we lost less money. That's really gratifying as a business owner to lose less money, right? So self gratification is the key, and understanding that when I get into an environment that I am trying to make things hurt less or I'm trying to make them feel better, anything that compromises that is going to automatically activate the part of my brain that goes, what's our strategy here? And then you have to go, well, how did I learn what feels good and what feels bad? What is my relationship with pain? And really simply put, I can tell you it's four basic things. You go from hard to hurt to harm to injury. And then
mm,
all of that can land in a place called trauma. But when you're in a workplace environment and somebody says something or somebody does something differently in a workspace or there's a project that doesn't show up, your brain has to go, is this hard? Is it going to
mm,
hurt? Am I going to get harmed? Am I going to get injured? Is it going to become a trauma? And the challenge is, I don't care what age you are. If you get triggered, your brain goes, what's our benchmark? And then it might be, well, maybe I lost connection, or maybe I saw someone die, or maybe I lost a toy. Whatever the case may be, whenever you get triggered, the easiest thing to do is go, when did I learn my unique relationship with pain in this particular space? And the settings are innumerable, but you're basically having a conversation around, I'm feeling some degree of pain, or I'm feeling some degree of pursuing what it is that I want, and nothing's going to get in my way, especially as a business owner. Where did I learn the strategy for getting what I want or avoiding what I don't? And that can, especially from the family dynamic, just to speak to that quickly,
mm,
most people forget the root word for familiar is familial. So if
mm.
you are in a space where it feels familiar, you probably learned that strategy, which is really helpful to know in any working relationship or any romantic relationship or any relationship in general.
Wow.
90% of our triggers were built before you ever met that person. So if somebody gets triggered, there's a 90% chance that whatever triggered them has nothing to do with you and
Mm,
everything to do with what you remind them of. And that's very different.
yeah. So, in speaking about creating safe environments and safe places, how do we as a team all get on board with this self gratification and stop working from trauma? How can we all
Yeah.
be aware of that and show up and notice it in myself, but
Yeah.
notice things happening in the moment? Like, what kind of recommendations as you work with teams and team dynamics do you offer to
Yeah.
help teams begin to recognize this and have that self awareness?
Yeah, I think the quickest phrase is you got to get in the driver's seat. And the reality to get into the driver's seat is not just being more cognitively kind of competent. It's the reality that I tell every leadership group that I work with. I just did a retreat for the executive coaches for Ernst and Young that coach their C-suite. These are some of the most skilled people on the planet with conflict resolution. And having a conversation with them and going, in the last 10 years of your work, how many times did you have a conversation with that person about actually connecting to their own body in real time in that
Mm,
moment?
mm,
And nobody in the room did it. And the reason I said that is this isn't esotericism. This isn't kind of being woo woo or new age. I said 97% of what happens to you on a daily basis is unconscious or subconscious. You are on autopilot as a normal human being 95 to 97% of the time. And if
mm,
you're on autopilot, if you've ever driven a Tesla or ridden in a Waymo, there's nobody even in the driver's seat. And if
mm,
they are in the driver's seat, their car is in control in autopilot. So
mm.
when you know that you're on autopilot most of the time, who do you think is doing that work? It's your body. So 95 to 97% of the time, your body is in charge for a reason. So just checking in, then the question becomes, well, how do I check in and how do I get into the driver's seat really easily? It's three basic things. If you cannot control your face, you cannot control your breathing, and you cannot control your hands, you are not in the driver's seat.
Oh,
So the easiest
interesting.
thing to
Okay.
do is to breathe and go, if for instance, even in real time, if we run out of time for the podcast, for the time that you have, and we don't have the capacity to choose to do this for 10 seconds, if I cannot find 10 seconds to take a single deep breath, control my face, check in with my own body, I am not in control. I am not in the driver's seat because I am saying that the need to accomplish what it is that we need to do in the company, in the next moment, in the podcast, does not afford me a 10-second moment to breathe, change my facial expression, or find my hands. You
Mm.
are absolutely not in control. And every decision you make downstream is suspect.
How do we, when we're activated? I think that's the biggest piece is when we are activated, how do we find that baseline? What tools or things do you give to people? And I think this goes two ways. One,
Yeah.
having that self-realization, right? And ultimately that's what we want to do as leaders is we want to empower other people to begin to
Yeah.
lead themselves, right?
Yeah.
So one, leaders might recognize people on the team. That could be an outburst. That could be someone feeling someone kind of disengage a little bit. And because we all respond and react. But when we're in that state, is everyone in autopilot? And how do we move a team to a place of safety where people can actually heal is a strong word, right? Because these are professional
Sure.
teams, but in some senses, communities and relationship can heal past experiences in a really good
Yeah.
way and bring a place of safety. But how do you encourage leaders to show up and have those tough conversations and even realize that hopefully in that place they're not singling someone out and using their own trauma to attack someone else, but maybe there's some
Yeah.
pieces like how do you help teams
Totally.
navigate these things if a majority of us are on autopilot and maybe hulking out, right?
Yeah. It's one of the biggest challenges with life in general is that there's so many variables and there's so many ways to navigate it. I mean, we're going to be different people by the end of this conversation than we were by the beginning of it. So how do you compensate for literally again an innumerable amount of options? And you've got to go more with concepts than context because there's just too many options.
Hmm,
So one of the concepts that we work through that's in the clinic is if it is hard, it is helpful. If it is harmful, it is not. And the
hmm,
thing that differentiates hard from harmful is how much it hurts. And as leaders, one of the things that we actually have to do is be able to gauge when we're asking somebody to do something hard that may end up hurting a little bit, but it won't harm them.
hmm.
And also, when are we harming our staff because we're doing something that we don't think is hard, but for them is wildly traumatic and wildly difficult?
Wow.
How do we understand all of those variables? And there's actually a really really easy way to do it that comes back to the driving analogy and with autopilot. And it's tied to this whole concept of increased self awareness, but starting from something that's a little bit more approachable. Is when you're taught to drive, especially most people in the states nowadays. I'm originally, obviously from overseas, so my favorite way to drive is a manual. But most folks who are in the realm of driving or staying in the driver's seat, they drive an automatic, and life is not automatic. It can be on autopilot, but if you don't realize that just having a brake and a gas pedal only gives you so much control. But if you know that life is way more manual than it is automatic, you need a brake pedal, a clutch, and a gas pedal so that you can more dynamically change gears. So one of the things that I work with leaders and teams is to be able to go, first and foremost, before you try to fix every problem or before you try to solve everything or before you try to find a way to engage with everybody on the staff, try and figure out who is more naturally a brake pedal, who is more naturally a gas pedal, and who's more naturally a clutch. You're going to have
Hmm.
people that are good at slowing down, and you need that, especially as leaders,
Hmm.
especially as entrepreneurs, especially as CEOs who don't want brake pedals, and then they wonder
It's
why
true.
everybody is leaving. Or you have people who are naturally a gas pedal and they're going, why would I ever use a brake pedal? Or people who are clutch who stay in the same gear and go, you know what's safe for me? Second gear is safe for me. So when
Mm,
you understand that there is always in a healthy system going to be a gas, a clutch, and a brake that allows you to more manually manage the situation, then you can go into spaces of going, hey, heads up, man, I love that you want to go 80, but did anybody tell you that this conversation is a school zone? We're in a school zone and you
mm,
can go 80. 80 is not a problem, but 80 in a school zone, you're going to get somebody killed or you're
mm,
at minimum going to get arrested.
mm,
And if you try
mm.
to run a meeting in a school zone speed at 80 miles an hour, you're going to hurt somebody. But then that same conversation, if you go 20 in the fast lane, you're going to also cause a completely different suite of problems. So figuring out what everybody's energy is, like, are you a gas, a clutch, and a brake? And that's not a problem. But this conversation requires a gas pedal or a brake pedal, or we have to change gears. Then you decide the environment and the speed. And man, you can solve 90% of the problems just by asking those basic questions.
How do you interact with someone that can be defensive, right? And so you know that the
Mm,
conversation needs to happen, but if you bring
right.
it up, it puts them into a triggered state. How do you have a
Yeah.
conversation with someone where it needs to happen, but you're a
Yeah.
little concerned that it might activate it further? Like, what
Yeah.
how do you do that?
I think, well, if you've already got an inclination that somebody has a degree of defensiveness about them, then there's already some anticipation. So I think that that same energy in the body that is contingency planning and prepping and kind of
Sure.
trying to do some damage control is already there. But I think the reality is knowing that if somebody is defensive, then what you really have most of the time with defensiveness is an unresolved problem or a lack of clarity.
Mm,
Somebody's being defensive because something doesn't make sense, and also they're committed to a particular process and they're trying to see it through, and you may be compromising either their competence or their capacity or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of things to figure out, but when someone is being defensive, I think one of the best things to do is, one, give permission. Be like, look, man, I love that you love the thing that you're working on enough to be defensive about it.
mm,
I feel you wanting to defend something. Can we work together and partner together where I can help you find the right thing to fight for? Because I
mm,
love that you have fight energy, but also at the same time, this is not a conversation where we're trying to create conflict. We're trying to solve a problem.
mm,
Another really easy hack also is every single person who's defensive, they increase in energy. It doesn't become, as some people can be passive aggressive or give you cold shoulder. Their defensiveness is more withdrawal. But if you get defensiveness that is, again, all different engagement styles, one of the most effective things to do, whether somebody wants to hit the eject button or they want to dominate the conversation, is to have that same conversation on a walk and
mm,
also do it in a place where you can be observed, but you can't be heard. And the
mm,
reason I say that is if you're walking around, like you take a walk around the building or you find a walking track or you go for a walk to a cup of coffee, if you do it in a place where you cannot be overheard, but you can be seen, every single person's system will start to self regulate if they know they are no longer in private, but they also understand that the conversation is still private. Your
mm.
self regulation is completely different, especially if you can move, because that increased energy is going to show up in the body and it's
Sure.
going to compound if you stay still. So
Yeah.
if they're getting kinetic, get kinetic, move your body, and have the conversation in a public environment, but in a private way.
I like that. I
Yeah.
I think oftentimes we're sometimes, and I could speak to for myself for this, we're afraid to offend somebody. So
Mhm.
we either nothing is said and we go around people or specific situations. or we have a conversation and it makes it worse, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of what
Yeah.
you're teaching are tools to recognize and have empathy and compassion for someone
Totally.
else. But I think you speak a lot of this element of becoming whole, right?
Yeah.
And so when you think and when we talk about that, what does that mean to you when you talk to someone and talk about, hey, you've had these instances in your past and you I'm going to teach you how to become more whole in
Yeah.
that specific area. There's an awareness of thinking to yourself, oh, these are areas I need to grow. But what does
Yeah.
that mean specifically to you, and how do you help someone, quote unquote, become more whole?
Yeah. I think it's safe to say whether regardless of anybody's background, whether it is a family of origin, a community of origin, a spiritual community of origin, there are very few people on the planet that I have met that don't have either a pretty strong relationship with shame or being broken or being flawed
Mm,
or being less than in some way. And there are very few
sure.
people that I've met that have a healthy relationship with being more complete. Like, some you meet somebody who's like, man, I am a really healthy, happy, whole, self-sufficient version of myself.
Hmm.
They've either done a ton of work or they're branching into a little bit of disillusionment and narcissism, right? You don't generally tend to meet people who think very highly of themselves who also happen to be very stable and healthy. So when we're looking at the relationship of going, I call it the Slim Shady effect, right? For anybody who's seen 8 Mile, it's like, what is a way that I could navigate the truth of what I'm experiencing in a safe way? And a lot of it is, the root word of confidence. Most people don't realize the root word of confidence is confide. The first
Mm.
8 letters in the word, or is it seven? Seven, as I share confidently that I didn't remember the number of letters in confide. But no, is it seven? It's seven, yeah, as my brain's competing with me here. That when we're trying to navigate all of these pieces about, hey, I'm trying to have a hard conversation and I also can't be this person's therapist, and what does it mean to become whole? I think a huge part of it is, it's like when you open a GPS in your car and you're trying to figure out how to get from A to B, from where I am now to where I'll be at 80. And a lot of the times we're trying so hard to get somewhere, but we don't know where we are. We don't know currently where we're geolocated or socially
Mm.
located or
Yeah,
social location. But you hit the button on the GPS that orients you.
sure.
And I think one of the things that can be really powerful about becoming whole is orienting to the fact that every single person has been through a lot.
Mhm.
Identity is the sum total of every good and every bad thing that has ever happened to you and everything in between. But becoming whole is understanding more about who you are, the way you're wired, the decisions that you make, and knowing, man, Jerome's telling me that a lot of what I do is on autopilot. Do I know why I do what I do? Do I know why I do what I do?
Mm.
And then what does that information do for me to improve my capacity as a person and a driver and a leader? And I think a lot of becoming whole is just being able to admit, man, a lot has happened. And how do I navigate that in ways that allow me to do things differently? Because my brain's going to run the pattern and the protocol for me. Is the current strategy that I have moving me towards a more whole version of myself, or am I just trying to manage some degree of brokenness that's happened in my past? And have I even asked myself that question once in my life? What is driving and motivating me at all in the first place?
Wow. That I like that because it brings an element of self-awareness back to the element.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I love the GPS. It's kind of like when you go to a mall and you're like, we need to get here,
Yeah.
but where the hell are we now?
Yeah.
Right? It's this element
Which
of
I think is a fair statement for most people listening at this
yes,
point, that they have probably made that statement at least once or twice today,
yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah, I don't know what the hell is
100%,
happening. Where are
100%.
we? Yeah,
Exactly. Where are
a
we?
real thing.
Exactly. And so I love this because when you think about team and dynamics, you probably heard the term storm, norm, perform, right?
Yeah,
We use that term often as you're doing something new, you're storming, you're trying to figure it out. And then there's norms, people start to settle in to your point. Okay, you're the clutch, you're the brake, you're the gas. And then once
yeah,
we start to understand more about ourselves and the contributions we make as a team, then we start to perform, right?
yeah,
And I think that goes back to your place of, is it hard or is it harmful?
yeah,
And it can be both, right?
it
And I
can be.
think I most often than not, we always say assume positive intent because when you're offended, and I say you're meaning me, it's this person is doing this on purpose, right? Like you go to that place like they're
100%.
trying to hurt me, rather than getting to the point of, wait a minute, no, that's my own trauma speaking. That's my own stuff, right?
Yeah,
Let's assume positive intent and try to have an element of understanding so that way
yeah,
we can find a baseline. And that's hard because it
it
means
is.
I have to own my own stuff and it means I have to slow down.
Yeah,
And oftentimes in a business environment, there are a lot of pressures, right?
yeah,
We have to meet the benchmarks. We have to hit payroll. We have to hit these KPIs, and you're balancing the stress load with also balancing health and
yeah,
becoming quote unquote whole, right?
yeah,
It's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to navigate, but I
yeah,
think it's imperative, right?
yeah, it
So
is.
in that, like, what are some of the questions? I mean, I know you mentioned some of these things, but what are some additional things when someone is just feeling like, okay, I need to have that self-awareness of putting in the work? What are additional questions and
Yeah.
additional things that you recommend to them to do to find quote unquote you are here on the map?
Yeah, I think coming back to the driving piece, is first waking up and asking yourself, "Am I in the driver's seat of my own body? Do I even know that I have hands?" Right. So, as crazy as it is for a hack, before even trying to, raise a family, run a company, manage your own life, a
Mm,
really great hack, as I call the hands Alaska. If you drop Alaska over the continental U.S., it covers a third of the landmass. Your
mm,
hands are the same in your brain. Your body map, a third of your geographical body map, as far as your brain is concerned, is just your hands. That's why if you've ever gotten a paper cut that made you question your sanity or forget your name, it's because it's not that small. Your brain thinks the paper cut is inches long. It's a mortal wound.
it
Okay,
always is, okay? It
always.
always is.
It always is. If you want to watch, I just did this. It's to connect with you. Did what you talk about. I've got 3 kids that are 10 and under. My daughter just turned 8, and the boys bookend her by 2.5 years. My 5.5-year-old, I walk in the door last night after having a meeting, and it's one of those moments where when you can hear the screaming from the driveway, you shift gears, right?
I
And
have
I'm
3
taking it
too, I
easy.
get it.
Yeah, and my when you talk about gas, brake, and throttle, my daughter is a brake pedal who can become a gas pedal. My son, my oldest is a clutch. He can go in both directions. But the youngest, he is all gas all day. He even came out with fire red hair because he's a lit stick and dynamite. My man is kinetic. Okay. And I walk through the door and he is unfolding. He's unfolding. And I'm just, I drop into the gear where I'm like, check in, arms up, hands,
Mhm.
eyes, where we're going. He's got a piece of skin like a half an inch long coming off the underside of his toe. And my wife, in all of her skill and all of her effort, has lost him. And she's trying to help get a band aid off. And he is just losing it. And the reason being is the sensitivity in the feet and the hand are so high that for
Mm,
him, he has lost touch with reality. He doesn't know what's real anymore other than he is mortally wounded, right? The reason I mention all of this to come back to what the hell do we do in a business environment with this is your brain processes everything in the world through sensation first.
hmm,
How that applies in a body in a workplace is it depends on what you come into contact with. It depends on
sure.
what you are touching.
Huh.
So if you walk into a conversation and you sense a lot of conflict, your entire system goes on to high alert because whatever you are about to become aware of in your body is about to change your relationship with control. The ability to control anything in our life is built off of our motor systems. And I won't make this too complicated. But if you want the greatest hack in anything that you're doing in a workplace environment, find something to touch and then find some way to control your movement. So even as I'm having a conversation with you, if I change the speed of what I'm doing and I touch my body, or I start to talk to you with my right hand versus my left hand on purpose,
Mm,
as soon as I become aware of something sensory, smell, taste, touch, sight, sound, movement, right? As soon as I become aware of what I sense in the space, literally, and then I change what I move and what I control literally, it will change your relationship with what you think you sense or what you're feeling from an intuitive standpoint and what you're trying to control. And then that will change 90% of your conversations because what you're feeling may not be accurate and what you're trying to control
mm.
may not be possible. But if I check in with what I'm feeling in my body and what I can control with my body first, it immediately drops me into the driver's seat. And then you can start to become very aware of your driving style, very aware of what you're doing as a driver, who's in the car with you as a leader, and who else is navigating that environment with you in traffic. And then you have to show up differently because if we drove the same way half of us lead or parents, we'd get arrested.
Mm,
Right?
yeah, yeah,
So we
yeah,
have to think about how am I driving and what is influencing my driving, but what can I do practically because I'm losing it.
sure,
Touch is important. Move is more, and those are called safe touch and safe movement. They're two of
sure.
the four pillars in the finding safety model, but just touch and move can be really helpful.
Would you say in that example, safety is related to control? And should we focus on control, or should we focus on safety, or both? How do you navigate
Yeah,
that? Because sometimes when you're triggered, it's hard to
yeah.
find solid ground.
It's totally hard. And I'll just give you the 4 pillars of safety so you can kinda see the through line. Like, becoming whole is integrating all of these, finding safety is connecting to all of these. But
Sure.
you can summarize all of human experience. I don't care what the context is, physical, mental, emotional, relational, spiritual, professional, does not matter. All of it will come back to 4 basic pillars of safety: safe touch, safe movement, safe connections, and safe choices.
Hmm.
So, for instance, with my 5-year-old, he had no access. He was hulking out. The brain is gone. Choice is not available to him. He does not feel like it's a safe connection because my wife is trying to amputate his toe, as far as he's concerned. He's completely lost all sense of safe connection with her. She's trying to move towards him and help him, but every time she touches him, he gets reminded that she's trying to kill him. She's
Mm,
trying to actually kill him, as far as he's just in a complete cold sweat because it actually hurts. It actually hurts, right?
yeah.
So, where this comes in is safe touch is connected to our awareness of what's happening to our body, but safe movement is connected to how we control movement.
Mm,
So, for the sake of all the pillars, I won't give you everything, but in control, remember again with a spectrum, everything in the body is brake, clutch, and gas. So, when I'm trying to control my environment, I may have a propensity or a predisposition to hit the gas and trying to get more control through bigger energy. And
hmm,
what I need is to drop a gear and slow down. So, when you're talking about control, one of the fastest ways to exercise control in any context is be willing to change your speed on purpose. If I'm
interesting.
in a car, can I hit the gas and control accelerating? Can I let off the gas and control deceleration just because I don't have as much gas? Or do I need to change how hard I hit the brakes? Because if you're a leader who slams the brakes, you're going to put everybody into the back seat. Or if you're on the bus, you're going to end up with half of the people in the aisle.
With
So when it
whiplash.
comes to
Yeah.
control, yeah, it's whiplash. When it comes to control, you can ask yourself, it's just like an RSVP for a party. Yes, no, maybe. More, less, adjust, right? And when you're looking at that going, maybe the relationship with control that I have right now is just to ask, is this environment asking for me to slow down, speed up, stay right where I am? And if I need to do any of those three, slow down, speed up, maintain, am I doing that by going brakes, gas, or changing gears?
Mm.
Just that awareness of asking those two question sets, more or less same, gas, brake, clutch, you'll automatically get in touch with what exactly is my system asking for in relationship with control. Because most people think control is to react in their predisposed kind of way. And man, if you hulk out and you get more reactive, the only thing that you're controlling is getting in or out of the situation faster. That's it.
I like that. I
Yeah.
My wife and I have been talking uh recently about how much life has changed in the past 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And there's this element of an epidemic of loneliness, and I think a
Mhm.
lot of that came out of the pandemic. We had to shelter in place. My kids were
Yeah.
doing at-home learning, whatever in the hell that means, which just basically means they have iPads, and we're trying to teach
Sure.
them, and God bless people that
Nobody expected to
homeschool.
be a homeschool
Yeah,
teacher.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I am not a homeschool dad, and my
Sure.
wife is not a homeschool mom, right? And so, but there was a lot kind of lost during that time. A lot of people lost
Yeah.
relationships,
Yeah.
um, physical relationships. Some people lost emotional relationships. Just variance and differences in overall approach of how we see the world. But there is this piece of people feeling lonely, right?
Yeah.
And we bring that baggage to
Yeah.
our places of professional environment, right? So I'm curious for you, like as you're a clinician and you're operating in that world and you're seeing people feel lonely and they want to feel more connected, right? Like
Yeah.
what changed? You know, because one thing that we really value at Red Door is we value this human first community approach, and we
Yeah.
this is a place where we want people to feel connected and want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, right? And how do
Yeah.
we apply these principles to make them feel safe? But I also have
Mm.
to recognize the world has changed a lot in
Yeah.
that. And even you and I were on this digital podcast together. A lot of my employees moved during the pandemic to other states. So I
Totally.
don't have the luxury of going on a walk for
Yeah.
coffee. Sometimes it's seeing each other behind a screen, right?
Yeah.
So what changed and what recommendations do you have for people that are just navigating this new world of relationship and community?
Yeah, it comes into what's called the third pillar of safety, which is safe connection.
Mm,
The reality is that the style and the quality and the experience with connections completely changed.
mm,
People became so literally disconnected, right? One of the biggest mistakes that was made during COVID was calling it social distancing when it should have been called physical distancing, because the
mm,
reality is we're having a social connection right now and we are not together.
mm,
So one of my phrases that I say, especially for folks who do business like you, is proximity is not a prerequisite for connection. So if I want a safe connection, I don't have to be physically close to you. I have to be within reach. My twin brother lives in coastal Spain, close to where you guys have lots of experience, right? He is my best friend. We shared a womb together, right?
mm,
He is always within reach through Marco Polo. We do a video walkie talkie, we catch up. It's asynchronous. I don't even get a chance half the time to talk to him in real time. But the fact that I can pop up and he can dump on a video walkie talkie app like Marco Polo, I am so consistently connected with him and
mm,
connected to him.
mm.
But if I consider physical proximity the prerequisite for my connection, we have a problem,
Yeah.
right? So, what happened during COVID, which is really important for trauma and collective PTSD and complex PTSD, is the fear was so high that people were actually dying, regardless of what everybody's belief around COVID and the process and the mechanics were. People were dying. And it's like what happened with 9/11. Even if you weren't in New York, the reason people can remember where they were when they know that 9/11 happened is because your brain can't tell the difference between perception and reality. I
Mm.
was in Arizona. I walked into the room at 6:45 in the morning with my art teacher, Linda Legalia from Brooklyn. And we watched, my twin brother and I watched the second tower fall. The only people in the classroom were me, him, and her. And she hit the ground and unfolded the same way that my mom did when we found my dad had died. We
Wow.
came home and he was dead. She was on the floor knowing that people that she knew were dying, and she was in Arizona. So when the pandemic happened, everybody's experiencing such a high level of intensity that when the stress and the fear and the strangeness of all of it is just increasing, our ability to think clearly completely changes.
Hmm.
So the short answer is our relationship with connection and safe connections completely changed. So what do we do with that? The answer is safe connection is specifically connected to how our brain processes stability,
Hmm.
and stability is directly connected to trust. So if you're trying to create a place where you're trying to create a safe connection, then you want to be able to have conversations around, is this a stable work environment? Am I a stable person? Is
Sure.
this a stable conversation?
Sure.
And one of the best things that I can do is make sure that I am building legitimate trust with the people that I work with and that they're building trust with me. And the hack in that is always tied to confidence and self esteem.
Hmm.
And one of the most effective ways to build safe connections as a parent, as a business owner, as a leader, as a spouse is to remember that the root word of confidence is confide. There are very few things, and this ties in with Amy Donaldson's work with psychological safety. there is a very big difference between risk aversion and risk tolerance. And one of the most important things about risk tolerance is for a leader to demonstrate that they don't have it all figured out. That's why they hired you. To say,
Mm.
I don't know what I'm
Oh, I
doing.
like that.
I, in fact, am not sure how to do this. And I would love for you to trust that I'm trying to figure this out. This is a hard conversation, but I'm willing to do it because you're worth it. I esteem you. I need to earn esteem from you about my work. So, the best way that I can build trust is to tell you transparently there are some things that I'm very competent in, and there are other areas that I can't be or I haven't learned how to yet. That's where we collaborate. Will you connect with me to create a little bit more stability so that we can build a little bit more trust? And then all of a sudden, we're sailing. All of that changed during COVID because nobody could trust anything. Everything was
Mm.
unstable. Everybody's confidence was shot. All the connections went out the window. And then no wonder everybody's feeling this level of loneliness because they don't know how to connect in this new world, in these new bodies, in these new spaces. And there has to be some adjustments that are made there.
Wow. I like how you're speaking about the element of leadership, and because I was kind of taught like fake it before you make it. Show
Yeah.
up, have confidence, but the humility to say I don't know everything, and that's
Yeah.
why I hired you.
Yeah.
Like, that's hard as a leader
It's
because you
really
have to
hard.
admit that you
Yeah.
don't know it all, right?
Totally.
Because oftentimes as a leader in an organization, for a company, things of nature, there is this element that you're pointing to the North Star and
Yeah.
you're leading the charge. And so there's a lot of pressure there.
There
And
is.
you don't wanna fail your
There's
team, and you don't wanna, but I think the element of being able to speak honestly and show up for yourself in that moment and for someone else, I love that. I'm like,
yeah.
"Okay." I'm already thinking about some
It's
conversations
huge.
that I wanna have, so.
And I think it's really important to tell staff, look, there is a difference between being a competent driver and having familiarity with this particular terrain, right? Like I can be a wildly competent driver. You drop me into a right-hand drive in a country like Europe or England, well, country like Europe,
Mm.
look at me, a continent like Europe. I sound like the people when you're from South Africa. Oh, South Africa's a continent, right? No, so listen, I'm going to pause for just a second. Take a moment, admit that I just said out loud, my dad is rolling in the grave that doesn't exist, that I just said a country like Europe. So
Just
I'm
hit the
gonna just say,
brakes. Just
see, we're
hit the
human,
brakes.
we're human, we're human. But if you are a wildly competent driver and you get into a new environment, it doesn't mean that you've lost skill. It means that you don't have that particular experience.
Mm.
So when you're leading somebody, you have to be able to tell them and demonstrate for them, especially if they're in your actual car, in your environment that you're managing. I am a competent driver and I would like for you to help me navigate, but you're not
Mm.
driving.
Mm.
I would like for you to help participate in the back, but don't backseat drive. Give feedback. If everybody knows how to geolocate and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, we're motoring. Like I used to own a Mini Cooper for years and you'd go on a ride with 300 Mini Coopers and everybody knew how to have fun and navigate with each other, but nobody, you always know there's the one idiot who decides he wants to race up and down, Deal's Gap at Tail of the Dragon, and he ends up off the side of the mountain because, yeah, man, you're outside of your depth. If you know what you're doing, I think one of the important things with the trust piece is to remind people that they can trust you as a driver. And the best thing that you can do is don't lie about your capacity to handle a new space.
Mm.
That's why everybody's helping to navigate that. But it still requires you to drive and maintain a high level of engagement. But the competency is not connected to the new thing, it's connected to all the experience that you've brought into that new thing.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. Thank you for joining this episode with Dr. Jerome as we dig into his past, trauma, self awareness, and what it means to become more whole. In the next episode, we're going to talk about AI, what that means for ourselves personally and our own personal growth, but how it affects our families, our children, and the people around us. Stay tuned.